The snowstorm raged on, but she didn't move. A golden retriever mother lay curled up in the freezing cold, shielding her 6 tiny puppies with the last warmth she had left. Her breath was weak, her fur covered in ice, but her love never wavered. She had been abandoned, yet she refused to abandon them. Would help arrive in time, or had her final sacrifice been in vain? The wind howled through the desolate countryside, carrying with it thick sheets of snow that blanketed the frozen earth. It was the kind of storm that sent people rushing indoors, the kind that swallowed the world in white and made even the most familiar roads feel like an endless void. Samuel gripped the steering wheel of his truck tightly, his knuckles turning white as he peered through the windshield. The wipers struggled against the ice, barely clearing enough for him to see the lonely road ahead. He had lived in this town for decades, knew these roads like the back of his hand, but tonight everything was obscured, shrouded in the ruthless grip of winter. Then something caught his eye. At first he thought it was just a mound of snow piled against the side of the road, another drift sculpted by the howling winds. But as he passed, a shape within the white mass twitched, ever so slightly. A movement so faint that most would have missed it. Samuel's heart clenched. He pressed the brakes, the truck skidding slightly before coming to a halt. Without hesitation, he pulled his coat tighter around him, yanked his gloves on, and stepped out into the frigid night. The wind bit at his face, and each breath sent ice into his lungs. Yet none of it mattered, because lying there, barely visible against the storm, was a golden retriever mother, her body curled protectively around a cluster of tiny, trembling figures. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. The mother's fur was stiff with ice, her body unmoving except for the faint rise and fall of her chest. She was barely conscious, her golden eyes heavy with exhaustion, yet filled with an undying love as she looked down at the fragile lives nestled against her. 6 puppies, so small they barely had any fur to protect them, huddled against her belly, whimpering softly. Their tiny bodies shivered violently against the cold, their fragile forms pressing into their mother, desperate for warmth. But she had none left to give. Samuel knelt in the snow, ignoring the way the ice burned through his jeans. His fingers trembled as he reached out, brushing against the mother's frost-covered fur. She flinched. Even in her weakness, even with death looming over her like the storm itself, she was still a mother, still protective. "Easy, girl," Samuel murmured, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I'm here to help." She blinked slowly, her gaze meeting his, and in that instant, Samuel understood. She wasn't afraid, she wasn't angry, and she was begging him to save them. Samuel swallowed the lump in his throat. His training as a veterinarian told him that she was in critical condition. Her body temperature was too low, her breathing weak. She had been out here for hours, maybe longer. The tracks in the snow told a painful story. She had wandered, searching, moving as far as she could until her body could take no more. Had she been abandoned here, left to die with her puppies? Or had she simply been lost, a casualty of an uncaring world? The answer didn't matter. What mattered was that she had given everything, every ounce of warmth, every last breath, to keep her babies alive, and now she had nothing left. Without wasting another second, Samuel shrugged off his thick winter coat and wrapped it carefully around the mother and her puppies. The moment the warmth enveloped them, the puppies squirmed closer, their weak cries growing just a little stronger. The mother barely reacted, only letting out a soft sigh. Samuel gently lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, far too thin for a dog her size. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to reassure her or himself. Carefully, he carried them to the truck, cradling the fragile family against his chest. The warmth of the cab was immediate, a stark contrast to the merciless cold outside. He placed the mother and her puppies on the passenger seat, making sure they were wrapped tightly in the coat before turning the heat up as high as it would go. As he pulled back onto the road, Samuel risked a glance at the mother dog. Her head rested against the seat, her breath shallow, but her eyes remained open, watching, waiting. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for them. Samuel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "You're safe now," he murmured. "I promise." The truck rumbled forward, cutting through the blizzard, carrying the mother and her puppies toward whatever future they had left. The truck's tires crunched over the snow-covered driveway as Samuel pulled up to his cabin. The storm still howled outside, but inside, the golden glow of the porch light cast a warm, welcoming contrast against the cold night. He didn't waste a second. With careful but urgent movements, Samuel gathered the mother dog and her puppies into his arms, shielding them from the wind as he rushed inside. The moment the door swung shut behind him, the biting cold was replaced with the gentle embrace of warmth. His living room was simple, but tonight it became a battlefield, a place where life and death would be decided. Samuel laid the mother dog on a thick woolen blanket beside the fireplace. She barely stirred. Her breathing was too shallow, her body too cold. He had seen hypothermia before, but this was worse than he had feared. His fingers instinctively moved to her gums, pressing lightly. They were pale, almost white. Her circulation was dangerously weak. If he didn't act fast, she wouldn't make it. The puppies, still wrapped in his coat, whimpered softly, huddling against one another in a desperate attempt to stay warm. They were young, far too young to survive without their mother's care. Samuel swallowed hard. He couldn't let them lose her. The battle begins. He moved quickly, grabbing a heating pad from the closet and slipping it beneath the blanket. Then he took a thick towel, rubbing her fur in slow, firm strokes to generate warmth. "Come on, girl," he murmured, his voice gentle but pleading. "Stay with me." Her body was unresponsive, her breathing barely perceptible. He needed to get her fluids up. Samuel hurried to the cabinet, pulling out a small IV bag. As a retired veterinarian, he still kept medical supplies for emergencies like this. With steady hands, he inserted the needle into a vein on her front leg, securing it with tape. The warm fluids would help stabilize her, but only if she had enough strength left to fight. The puppies began to cry, sensing their mother's stillness. One of the smallest, a golden little one with a tiny white patch on his paw, crawled weakly toward her, nuzzling against her unmoving body. Samuel clenched his jaw. "Not yet," he whispered. "Don't leave them yet." Carefully, he filled a dropper with warm water and brought it to her lips. At first, she didn't respond, but after a few agonizing seconds, her tongue flicked out, just barely. Hope. Samuel exhaled shakily. "That's it, girl. Just a little more." He kept going, feeding her small drops, rubbing her fur, watching, waiting for any sign that she was still holding on. Minutes stretched into hours. The fire crackled beside them, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The puppies, exhausted from their ordeal, had finally fallen asleep, curled together in a tiny bundle of golden fur. But their mother, she remained frighteningly still. Samuel ran a hand through his graying hair, exhaustion weighing down on him. He had seen too many animals lost to the cold, to starvation, to the cruelty of abandonment. But something about this mother dog, her fight, her sacrifice, struck him deep. So he did the only thing left to do. He prayed. A night of waiting. "Lord," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, "if there's any mercy left in this world, please let her wake up." The old clock on the wall ticked away the long night. Every few minutes, Samuel checked her vitals, rubbed warmth into her paws, and whispered reassurances she might not even hear. Outside, the storm finally began to ease. The wind softened, the snow settled, but inside the battle was still being fought. Then, just as dawn's first light crept through the frosted window, a sound. A weak, barely audible whimper. Samuel's head shot up. The mother dog shifted, just slightly. Her breath hitched, her paw twitched. And then, ever so slowly, her tired eyes fluttered open. Samuel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Good girl," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You're still with us." The puppies, as if sensing the change, began to stir. One by one they wriggled towards her, their tiny noses pressing into her fur, and this time she moved. Weakly, shakily, she lifted her head just enough to nuzzle them back. A mother's love had kept her alive. Samuel sat back, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. But for the first time that night, he allowed himself to hope. The fight wasn't over yet, but maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The golden hues of dawn seeped through the frosted window, casting a soft glow over the small living room. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing faintly, but the room was still warm, warmer than the frigid world outside. Samuel stirred in his chair, his back stiff from hours of sitting on the floor beside her. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, but exhaustion had crept in, pulling him under despite his efforts to stay awake. And then he heard it. A faint sound, so soft, so delicate that for a moment he thought he had imagined it. But then it came again, a weak, feeble whimper. His eyes snapped open. The mother dog had moved. Samuel leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat as he watched her, hardly daring to believe. She was awake. Her golden eyes, though clouded with exhaustion, were open, gazing down at the tiny puppies nestled against her belly. For the first time in hours, hope flickered in Samuel's chest. "You made it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You held on." Slowly, painstakingly, the mother dog lowered her head, her tongue flicking out to gently lick one of her puppies. It was barely more than a touch, just a whisper of movement. But to Samuel, it was everything. A mother's love, a mother's fight, a mother's promise. The smallest of the puppies, the one with the tiny white patch on his paw, let out a soft yip and burrowed closer to her warmth. The others followed, pressing against her weak but steady frame. Samuel exhaled shakily. He had feared the worst, had prepared himself for the unbearable. But now it seemed like they had won. Then he noticed it. Something was wrong. A silent goodbye. She wasn't moving beyond that small effort. She wasn't trying to stand. She wasn't fighting anymore. Samuel's chest tightened as realization dawned upon him. She wasn't staying for herself. She was staying for them. Her golden eyes flickered up, locking onto his with an understanding that needed no words. She knew, and so did he. Samuel swallowed hard, his throat tight. "No, not yet." But she didn't listen. Instead, she turned back to her puppies one last time, pressing her nose into their soft fur, inhaling their scent, feeling their warmth, saying goodbye. A soft sigh escaped her lips, and then, slowly, peacefully, she closed her eyes, and she didn't open them again. The weight of love. Silence, the kind of silence that pressed into Samuel's chest like a crushing weight. The puppies whimpered, shifting against their mother's still body, but she didn't respond. Samuel didn't move, didn't breathe. His hand reached out on instinct, pressing gently against her chest, searching, hoping, praying, but there was nothing. No rise and fall, no heartbeat. She was gone. Samuel closed his eyes, his fingers curling into fists against the blanket. He had seen death before. As a veterinarian, he had faced it more times than he could count. But this was different, because she hadn't died for nothing. She had fought until the very end. She had given everything, every last breath, every last heartbeat, to make sure her puppies survived. And now it was up to him. Samuel swallowed past the lump in his throat, wiping his eyes before the tears could fall. Slowly, gently, he reached out and pulled the puppies into his arms. They squirmed, their tiny bodies warm against his hands, their cries soft but steady. They didn't understand. They would never know how much he had sacrificed for them. But Samuel did. and he would make sure her love lived on. The morning sun cast golden rays across Samuel's snow-covered land, painting the world in soft hues of orange and pink. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence that felt almost sacred. The air was still, the wind gentle, as if the earth itself was mourning. Samuel stood beneath the towering oak tree in his backyard, the same tree that had weathered many seasons before him. Now it would stand as a resting place for the bravest mother he had ever known. With careful hands, he patted down the last mound of soil. A simple wooden marker stood at the head of the grave, with only one word etched into it: Mother. No other name was needed. She had been more than just a dog, more than just a stray left to fend for herself. She had been a mother who had given everything for her children. Samuel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his greying hair as he looked down at the fresh grave. "I'll take care of them," he murmured. "I promise." And so, her legacy began. 6 little lives, 1 big promise. The puppies were still too young to understand their loss, too small to comprehend the absence of the warmth they had known from birth. But Samuel was determined to make sure they never felt alone. He brought them inside, set up a warm bed near the fireplace, and dedicated himself to their care, bottle-feeding them every few hours, keeping them warm, and watching over them as they took their first unsteady steps. Days turned into weeks, and the fragile newborns grew into playful, mischievous bundles of energy. Samuel gave each of them a name, each one carrying a part of the warmth and love their mother had left behind. Sunny for the brightest one, always eager to chase the morning light. Maple for the one with a rich golden coat like autumn leaves. Goldie, who looked just like her mother. Coco, the smallest girl with chocolate-coloured eyes. Biscuit, who always found a way to steal snacks from Samuel's pockets. And Hope, the smallest, weakest of them all, the one who had almost been lost. Hope was different. While the others grew strong and bold, Hope remained smaller, quieter. But what he lacked in size, he made up for in spirit. He followed Samuel everywhere, his little paws padding close behind him, his bright eyes watching his every move. It was as if he knew, as if he understood that the man who had saved them had also lost something that night. A forever home for each. Samuel had never planned to keep them all. As much as he loved them, he knew they deserved homes where they could receive the individual love and attention they needed. So, when the time came, he found them the best families. Sunny went to a farm with wide open fields, where he could chase the sun all day long. Maple was adopted by a retired teacher, a kind woman who loved to read by the fire, her new companion curled up beside her. Goldie found a home with a little girl who had lost her own mother, the two forming a bond that only those who had known loss could understand. Coco went to a big family with children who adored her, where she would never know loneliness. Biscuit, unsurprisingly, ended up with a baker who spoiled him with treats. One by one they left, their tails wagging, their futures bright. But Hope stayed. The smallest, the quietest, the one who never left Samuel's side, and so Samuel didn't let him go. A piece of her still here. Seasons changed, the snow melted into spring, and the house no longer felt as empty as it once had. Hope grew into a loyal, loving companion, always watching, always following, as if a piece of his mother had remained behind to watch over the man who had saved them all. Samuel would often catch Hope staring at the old oak tree, ears perked, as if listening for something unseen. And on quiet nights, when the world outside was still, Samuel would sit by the fire, Hope curled at his feet, and whisper into the silence. "She'd be proud of you," he would say. And maybe, somewhere in the wind that rustled through the branches of that old oak tree, a mother's love still lingered, eternal, unwavering, never truly gone.